The midnight winds of 1875 carried Lenora Sinclair's voice above the dusty plains of Sweetwater, Texas. A song so pure and powerful it made the saloon windows rattle and the lonesome hearts stop in their tracks. She never imagined her voice would be her downfall or that a man who bought her for it would ultimately set her free. Lenora's auburn hair caught the final rays of sunset as she swept the wooden floor of the rusty nail saloon. Most patrons had departed, leaving only the usual drunkards slumped over their tables and the ever-watchful eyes of Barton Willis, the establishment's owner. She hummed softly at first, the melody of a lullaby her mother taught her before consumption claimed her 3 winters past. "Girl, how many times must I tell you to keep quiet?" Barton's voice cut through her song like a dull knife. "I'm sorry, Mr. Willis," Lenora replied, gripping the broom tighter. "I didn't realize I was singing aloud." Barton approached, his bulky frame casting a long shadow across the floor she'd just swept. His breath reeked of whiskey and cigar smoke. "You work for me, not some fancy opera house. Your singing scares away my customers." Lenora bit her tongue. At 20 years old, she'd learned that arguing only made things worse. After her father's death left her penniless and alone, Barton had offered her work at the saloon. Not as an entertainer or one of his special girls upstairs, but as a cleaner and occasional server. The pay was meager, but it kept her fed and housed in the small room behind the kitchen. "Yes, sir, won't happen again." She lowered her gaze. Barton nodded, seemingly satisfied, and retreated to his office. Lenora continued her sweeping, keeping her lips pressed firmly together even as the melodies danced in her mind. Music had been her solace since childhood, a gift from her mother who once sang in churches throughout the territory. Lenora couldn't help it. Songs flowed from her as naturally as water from a spring. The following morning dawned hot and dusty, as most days did in Sweetwater. Lenora rose before the sun, preparing the saloon for the day ahead. As she polished the long mahogany bar, she allowed herself the smallest of melodies, believing the empty saloon was her only audience. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," she sang softly, her voice rising slightly with each word, "that saved a wretch like me." The front door creaked open, startling her into silence. A man stepped inside, silhouetted against the bright morning light. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his eyes, he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with his own power. "Don't stop on my account," he said, his voice deep and smooth like aged whiskey. Lenora clutched her polishing rag. "I apologize, sir. We don't open until noon." The stranger approached the bar, and now she could see his face tanned from the sun, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I'm not here for a drink." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Name's Jackson Stone." "Looking for Barton Willis." Before Lenora could respond, Barton's office door swung open. "Stone, right on time." Barton clapped the stranger on the shoulder. "Come on back, we've got business to discuss." The stranger, Jackson, glanced once more at Lenora before following Barton, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. Something in his gaze lingered in her mind long after he disappeared into the office. Hours later, as the saloon began to fill with the usual midday crowd, Lenora moved between tables with trays of whiskey and beer. The saloon girls had begun their rounds, laughing too loudly at patrons' jokes and sitting on laps when invited. Lenora kept her eyes down, focusing on her work. A piano player had arrived, a new fellow with nimble fingers who played jaunty tunes that set boots tapping. The familiar ache rose in Lenora's chest, the desire to join in, to let her voice soar above the tinny piano notes. She swallowed it down like bitter medicine. "You look like you're about to burst," a voice said beside her as she gathered empty glasses. Lenora turned to find Jackson Stone leaning against a post, watching her with curious eyes. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, balancing her tray carefully. "You're listening to every note like it's water in the desert. Your lips are moving, but you're not letting any sound escape." His observation was unnervingly accurate. "Mr. Willis doesn't allow me to sing." Jackson raised an eyebrow. Why would he forbid something like that? Lenora shrugged, uncomfortable with his attention. He says it disrupts the customers. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She hurried away, feeling his eyes follow her across the room. Throughout the afternoon, she noticed him watching, conversing occasionally with Barton but mostly observing the saloon's operations. He wasn't drinking much, which marked him as different from most men who spent their days at the Rusty Nail. As evening approached, the saloon grew rowdier. A fight broke out between two cowboys arguing over a card game, and Lenora retreated to the kitchen to avoid the flying fists and chairs. Through the swinging door, she watched as Jackson effortlessly separated the brawlers, his strength evident but controlled. Later, as she swept up broken glass, Lenora found herself alone in the main room with just the piano player who had taken a break, and Jackson, who nursed a single whiskey at the bar. "Play something slow," Jackson called to the pianist. When the man complied with a mournful tune, Jackson turned to Lenora. "Now sing," she nearly dropped her broom. "I told you Mr. Willis doesn't allow it. Willis is upstairs with Scarlett and won't be down for at least an hour. Sing, Miss Sinclair, Lenora Sinclair." "And I can't risk my position here." Jackson's eyes softened. "One song, Miss Sinclair. Consider it a personal favor to a weary traveler." Perhaps it was the kindness in his voice or the longing that had built inside her for so long, but Lenora found herself nodding. The piano player, intrigued, watched her expectantly. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. A ballad of lost love and redemption flowed from her lips, her voice starting soft but growing in power and emotion. The piano player quickly found her melody, accompanying her with gentle chords. For those few minutes, Lenora forgot about the saloon, about Barton, about her precarious position in life. She was transported back to her childhood home, singing beside her mother on their small porch as the Texas sun set behind the distant hills. When the final note faded, Lenora opened her eyes to find Jackson staring at her, his expression unreadable. The piano player was shaking his head in wonderment. "Good Lord, girl," he whispered. "That voice is a gift from above." "It certainly is," Jackson agreed, his gaze never leaving her face. A slow clapping from the stairs shattered the moment. Barton stood there, his face twisted in anger. "What did I tell you about singing in my establishment?" Lenora's stomach plummeted. "Mr. Willis, you're fired, Sinclair. Get your things and get out. I've warned you enough times." "Now wait a minute," Jackson rose from his stool. "That's an overreaction, Willis." Barton pointed a thick finger at him. "This is my business, Stone. The girl doesn't listen. She never has." Lenora felt tears welling in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Willis, I have nowhere else to go. Not my concern." Barton's tone was final. "Out by morning." As Barton stomped back upstairs, Lenora stood frozen, clutching her broom like a lifeline. What would she do? Where would she go? Sweetwater offered few opportunities for a young woman alone. Jackson approached her slowly, as one might a spooked horse. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you to sing." She wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. "It's not your fault. This was coming sooner or later. I can never keep quiet for long." He studied her for a moment. "Pack your things tonight. I'll return in the morning." "Why would you do that?" "You don't know me." A small smile played at his lips. "Let's just say I recognize quality when I see it, Miss Sinclair." True to his word, Jackson returned at dawn, finding Lenora sitting on her small trunk outside the saloon's back door. Her eyes were red-rimmed from a night of tears and worry, but she stood tall as he approached. "You actually came back," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I'm a man of my word." He tipped his hat. "I have a proposition for you." Lenora's guard immediately rose. She'd heard propositions from men before, and they were never respectable. Reading her expression, Jackson quickly added, "A business proposition, Miss Sinclair. Nothing untoward." "What kind of business could you possibly have with me?" "I own a small ranch about 30 miles north of here." "The Circle S been building it up for a few years now." He shifted, suddenly seeming less sure of himself. "Thing is, I also own the only decent establishment in the nearby town of Redemption." "An establishment," the Wandering Star. "It's a restaurant and gathering place." "Nothing like the Rusty Nail. Respectable folks come there, families even." He cleared his throat. "And I need entertainment, someone with real talent, not just another tinny piano." Lenora blinked, trying to process his words. "You want me to sing at your restaurant?" For fair pay and a room of your own above the place, you'd be treated with respect. It sounded too good to be true. Why would you offer this to a complete stranger? Jackson ran a hand through his hair. Because when you sang yesterday, it was the first time in years I felt something. Something genuine. He looked almost embarrassed by the admission. Talent like yours shouldn't be silenced, it should be shared. Lenora weighed her options, which were painfully few. She could try to find work in another saloon, possibly end up in a worse situation than before, or she could take a chance on this man and his offer. I accept, she said finally, though I have conditions. Jackson's eyebrows rose. I'm listening. I'll sing, but I won't be treated as property. I want a written agreement about my pay and duties, and if at any time I feel uncomfortable or mistreated, I reserve the right to leave without consequences. A slow smile spread across Jackson's face. You're not just a voice, are you, Miss Sinclair? You've got a head for business too. I've learned to protect myself in a world that rarely does. Fair conditions, we have a deal. He extended his hand and she shook it, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. My wagon's around front, let's get your belongings loaded. As they traveled north, Lenora watched Sweetwater disappear behind them, a strange mixture of relief and apprehension filling her chest. The landscape gradually changed, flat plains giving way to rolling hills dotted with oak and mesquite. Jackson proved to be a quiet traveling companion, speaking only to point out landmarks or to ask if she needed to rest. Tell me about redemption, she said as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Small place, about 200 souls. Started as a mining town, but the silver played out 10 years back. Now it's mostly ranchers, farmers, and those who serve them. He adjusted the reins. Good people mostly, they're trying to build something that lasts. And your ranch, the Circle S, 1,500 acres. Not the biggest spread, but it's growing. Got about 500 head of cattle and a dozen good horses. Pride colored his voice. Started with nothing but a broken-down cabin and 50 acres when I came back from the war. You fought in the war, he nodded, his expression darkening slightly. Union side, not a popular position in these parts, but I stand by it. Lenora appreciated his frankness. My father fought as well, came back changed. Most of us did, Jackson said softly. They lapsed into silence again, the rhythmic clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels their only accompaniment. By mid-afternoon, Lenora spotted buildings in the distance. Redemption, Jackson announced. Not much to look at, but it's home. The town consisted of a main street with wooden buildings on either side, many sporting fresh paint, a sign of prosperity lacking in Sweetwater. People nodded respectfully to Jackson as he guided the wagon down the street, several calling out greetings by name. The Wandering Star, he said, pulling up in front of a two-story building with large windows and a wide porch. A hand-painted sign featuring a comet hung above the entrance. Restaurants on the main floor, your quarters would be upstairs if they're satisfactory. Lenora took in the establishment, noting its clean appearance and the flowers planted in boxes beneath the windows. It was indeed nothing like the Rusty Nail. Jackson helped her down from the wagon, then led her inside. The interior was bright and airy, with polished tables and chairs arranged throughout the space. A long counter ran along one wall, behind which she assumed was the kitchen. At the far end stood a small stage with a piano. This is where you'd perform, he explained, 3 nights a week to start. More if business increases, which I expect it will once word of your talent spreads. An older woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. So this is her, the songbird you wouldn't stop talking about, Lenora noted with amusement the color that rose in Jackson's cheeks. Martha Jenkins, this is Miss Lenora Sinclair. Miss Sinclair, Martha is our cook and the closest thing to a civilizing influence this town has. Martha approached, studying Lenora with shrewd but kind eyes. You really sing as well as he claims. I couldn't say what Mr. Stone has claimed, Lenora replied with a small smile, but I do sing. Martha nodded approvingly. Good answer, not full of yourself, I like that. She turned to Jackson. Show her the room, I'll finish preparing supper. The upstairs room was simple but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed, a dresser with a mirror, a small writing desk, and a washstand. A window overlooked the main street of Redemption, and another faced the distant hills. It's lovely, Lenora said honestly, setting down her small bag of personal items. Far better than I had at the Rusty Nail. The washroom is at the end of the hall. You'll share it with Martha, who has the other room up here. Jackson remained near the door, respectfully keeping his distance. I'll have your trunk brought up. Thank you. Lenora turned to face him fully. Mr. Stone, I still don't understand why you're doing all this for me. He considered her question for a long moment. I believe in recognizing opportunity, Miss Sinclair, for both of us. Your voice will bring customers to the Wandering Star, and in return, you'll have a safe place to use your gift. He smiled slightly. And perhaps we could both use a fresh start. With that cryptic remark, he left her to settle in. Lenora sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the quilt. For the first time in years, she felt something like hope taking root in her heart. That evening, after a hearty meal prepared by Martha, Jackson asked Lenora to sing for the small gathering of regulars at the Wandering Star. With no piano player present, she sang unaccompanied, choosing a folk song about longing for home that showcased the range and emotion of her voice. As the final note faded, the dozen or so patrons sat in stunned silence before erupting into enthusiastic applause. An older gentleman with a silver beard approached her afterward. Miss Sinclair, I'm Reverend Thomas. We'd be honored if you would consider singing at Sunday services as well. More requests followed. Would she teach singing to the schoolchildren? Could she perform at the upcoming town social? Would she consider a special performance for Mrs. Henderson's birthday? Jackson watched with evident satisfaction as the townsfolk embraced Lenora. Later, as they closed up for the night, he found her sitting alone at the piano, picking out notes. I can't play, she admitted. My mother taught me to sing, but never the piano. I'll find you a piano player, he promised, though your voice alone seems to be enough. Everyone has been so kind, Lenora mused. It's unexpected. Redemption is a good place. These people are building something meaningful here. He sat on the bench beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance. They recognize quality when they see it, just as I did. His words from earlier echoed in her mind. Mr. Stone, Jackson, please. Jackson, she amended. You mentioned a fresh start earlier. What did you mean by that? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. I came to Texas after the war with nothing but nightmares and guilt, found this place nearly abandoned, seemed fitting a failed town for a failed man. You don't seem failed to me, Lenora observed. You've built a successful ranch, a thriving business. Things can look right on the outside and still be hollow. His fingers brushed across the piano keys, producing a discordant sound. I haven't felt much of anything in a long time, not until I heard you sing. The confession hung in the air between them, intimate and unexpected. Lenora didn't know how to respond. Jackson stood abruptly. Forgive me, it's been a long day and you must be tired. We'll begin preparations for your formal debut tomorrow night. Before she could reply, he was gone, leaving Lenora with a jumble of confused feelings. She remained at the piano for a long while, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken and the complex man responsible for it. Over the next weeks, Lenora settled into life at the Wandering Star. True to his word, Jackson found her a piano player, a quiet man named Frederick who had studied music in Boston before heading west for his health. Together, they created arrangements that showcased her voice perfectly. Her first official performance drew people from miles around. The Wandering Star was packed to capacity, with some patrons standing along the walls just to hear her sing. As Jackson had predicted, business increased dramatically. Soon, she was performing 5 nights a week, with special engagements on Sundays at the church. Jackson himself was often absent, tending to his ranch duties, but he never missed her performances. He would sit at the back of the room, his expression intent as she sang. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the crowded space, and Lenora would feel a strange flutter in her chest that both excited and frightened her. One afternoon in late summer, as Lenora practiced with Frederick, a commotion outside interrupted their session. Raised voices and the sound of horses at a gallop drew them to the window. What's happening? She asked Martha, who had also come to investigate. The older woman's face tightened. Trouble, the Fletcher gang. 3 men on horseback had stopped in front of the general store across the street. Even from a distance, Lenora could see the guns holstered at their hips and the menacing way they surveyed the town. They come through every few months, Martha explained in a low voice. Demand protection money from the businesses, most pay rather than risk their wrath. Lenora watched as the apparent leader, a lean man with a pockmarked face, dismounted and entered the store. Has anyone ever stood up to them? Jackson tried once. Got a beating that left him bedridden for a week. Since then, he pays, though it galls him to do it. Martha's hand gripped Lenora's arm. Stay inside, girl. Men like that see a pretty face and get ideas. But Lenora's attention was caught by the sight of Jackson riding into town, his expression grim as he noted the Fletcher gang's horses. He dismounted in front of the wandering star, striding inside with purpose. Martha, Frederick, Lenora, he acknowledged them tensely. I see our visitors have returned. They just went into Harmon's store, Martha informed him. Jackson nodded, his jaw tight. They'll be here next. Martha, get the money from the safe. Let's make this quick and clean. You're just going to pay them. Lenora couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. His eyes flashed to hers, a mixture of anger and shame in their depths. You don't understand what these men are capable of. I understand bullies, she replied quietly. My father taught me that giving in only makes them bolder. This isn't a schoolyard squabble, Lenora. These men kill without hesitation. Before she could respond, the door swung open and 3 men swaggered in. The leader, whom Lenora now saw, was older than she'd first thought, with cruel lines etched around his mouth, smiled unpleasantly. Stone, right on time with our payment, I hope. Jackson's posture was rigid. Fletcher, business has been slow. Not what I hear. Fletcher's gaze swept the room, landing on Lenora. Something predatory entered his expression. Word is you've got yourself a songbird drawing crowds from all over the county. Leave her out of this, Jackson warned, stepping between them. Fletcher chuckled. Protective, ain't we? Must be quite a voice to have you all riled up. He turned to his companions. Boys, I think we deserve some entertainment while Mr. Stone counts out our money. She's not performing for you, Jackson said firmly. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Fletcher's hand moved to rest on his gun. That wasn't a request, Stone. Either she sings, or we decide your establishment no longer needs our protection, if you catch my meaning. Martha returned with a small pouch, which she handed to Jackson without a word. He held it out to Fletcher, who made no move to take it. The money and a song, Fletcher insisted, or there'll be consequences. Lenora stepped forward, ignoring Jackson's warning glance. I'll sing one song. Lenora, Jackson began, but she shook her head slightly. It's all right. She turned to Frederick. The Wanderer's Lament, please. As Frederick began to play the melancholy tune, Lenora gathered herself, drawing on all the emotion and power she possessed. When she began to sing, she directed her gaze straight at Fletcher, letting the song's message of loss and eventual justice fill the room. She watched as the hardness in Fletcher's eyes gradually softened, a look of something like pain flickering across his weathered face. By the final verse, all 3 men stood transfixed, the threat of violence temporarily suspended by the beauty of her voice. When she finished, silence hung in the air for several heartbeats. Fletcher was the first to recover, clearing his throat roughly and snatching the money pouch from Jackson's hand. That'll do, he muttered, avoiding Lenora's gaze. We'll be back next month, same arrangement. As the gang departed, Lenora felt Jackson's eyes on her. She turned to find him watching her with an unreadable expression. That was either very brave or very foolish, he said quietly. Perhaps both, she admitted, but I refuse to cower before men like that. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You continue to surprise me, Lenora Sinclair. That evening's performance was particularly spirited, as if Lenora had drawn strength from her encounter with the Fletcher gang. The audience responded enthusiastically, calling for multiple encores. By the time the last patron had departed, she was exhausted but exhilarated. You were magnificent tonight, Jackson said, helping her gather sheet music from the piano, even more so than usual. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, I've been meaning to ask you something. Ask away. When you came to the Rusty Nail that day, what brought you there? It wasn't just chance, was it? Jackson set down the music sheets, considering her question. No, it wasn't chance. I'd gone to Sweetwater looking for investments. The railroad's coming through next year and land values will soar. Barton Willis was looking to sell the saloon and I was considering buying it. You, buy a saloon? Lenora couldn't hide her surprise. As an investment only, I'd have hired someone else to run it. He leaned against the piano, but after seeing how Willis operated, I declined. Then I heard you singing that morning and something changed. What do you mean? Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of his discomfort. I'm not a fanciful man, Lenora. War and hard living knocked that out of me long ago. But when I heard your voice, it was like something woke up inside me, something I thought had died in the trenches outside Richmond. Lenora felt her pulse quicken. What happened next? I made Willis an offer, but not for the saloon. His eyes met hers, apologetic. For your contract. The words struck her like a physical blow. My contract? I didn't have a contract with Willis. He claimed you did. Said you owed him for room and board, that you were working to pay off your father's gambling debts. Jackson's expression darkened. I suspect now that was a lie, but at the time I believed him. I offered to buy out your debt. Lenora took a step back, anger rising in her throat. So when Willis fired me, it wasn't about your singing. He'd already agreed to sell your contract to me. The scene was for your benefit, to make you desperate enough to accept my offer without question. Shame colored his voice. I'm not proud of it, Lenora. You bought me. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Like cattle? No, he said quickly. I mean, yes, technically, but I trusted you, she interrupted, fury and humiliation coursing through her. I thought you were different, that you respected me. I do respect you, more than anyone I've ever known. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Please, let me explain fully. I think you've explained quite enough. I'm nothing but property to you, an investment. Tears stung her eyes. A songbird in a cage. That's not true. Jackson's voice was urgent. Yes, I originally bought your contract, but I tore it up the day we arrived in Redemption. You've been free to leave at any time. Lenora wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root. How convenient that you never mentioned this arrangement until now. I was wrong to keep it from you. I was afraid you'd leave before. He trailed off. Before what? Before I had the chance to prove myself worthy of your regard. The raw honesty in his voice gave her pause. I've never met anyone like you, Lenora. Your strength, your talent, your compassion, they've changed me, changed this town. She stood silent, conflicted emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to flee, to put distance between herself and this man who had deceived her. Another part recognized the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine remorse. I need time, she said finally. Time to think about all this. Jackson nodded solemnly. Of course, take all the time you need. And if you decide to leave Redemption, I'll provide whatever assistance you require. He left her then, alone with her troubled thoughts and the fading echoes of the evening's music. Morning found Lenora sitting on the porch of the Wandering Star, watching as Redemption slowly came to life. She'd slept little, her mind too full of Jackson's revelations and her own conflicted feelings. Martha joined her, offering a cup of steaming coffee. Rough night, you could say that. Lenora accepted the coffee gratefully. Did you know about how I came to be here? The older woman settled beside her. I suspected. Jackson isn't usually one for impulsive decisions, yet he brought you here with hardly any explanation. She patted Lenora's hand. But I also know a good man when I see one, despite his mistakes. He purchased me, Martha, like property. He gave you a chance at a better life, Martha corrected gently. Maybe his methods were wrong, but his heart was in the right place. Lenora sipped her coffee, considering, I don't know what to do now. What does your heart tell you? It's confused, Lenora admitted. I've built a life here. I have friends, respect, purpose, but knowing that it all began with a transaction. We all start somewhere, child. It's where we go from there that defines us. Martha stood, brushing off her skirt. Jackson's at the ranch today, said to tell you he'll abide by whatever decision you make. As Martha returned inside, Lenora remained on the porch, watching as more townsfolk appeared on the street. Several called greetings to her, their genuine warmth evident. In the months she'd been in Redemption, she'd become part of this community in a way she'd never experienced before. By midday, she'd made her decision. Borrowing a horse from the livery stable, she set out for the Circle S. The ride gave her time to organize her thoughts and gather her courage. The ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, white painted fences enclosing pastures where cattle grazed. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a two-story structure with a wide veranda. Several outbuildings and a large barn completed the picture of prosperity. As she approached, a ranch hand spotted her and called out to Jackson, who emerged from the barn. He froze at the sight of her, then slowly walked to meet her as she dismounted. Lenora. He removed his hat, his expression guarded. "I wasn't expecting you. I needed to see where you live," she said, "to understand you better." He nodded, gesturing toward the house. "Would you like to come inside?" The interior of the ranch house surprised her. She'd expected a bachelor's sparse accommodations, but instead found a home thoughtfully furnished with quality pieces, books lining shelves, and even a piano in the corner of the parlor. "My mother taught music before she married," Jackson explained, following her gaze. "After my parents died, the piano was one of the few things I kept." "It's a beautiful home," Lenora said sincerely. "Thank you. Most days it feels too empty for just one person." He offered her a seat, remaining standing himself. "Have you made your decision?" Lenora studied him, this complex man who had both deceived her and given her a new life. "I have questions first. Anything, I'll answer honestly. How much did you pay Barton Willis for me?" Jackson winced at her phrasing but answered steadily. $500. Lenora's eyes widened. It was a considerable sum. "And what did you expect in return for this investment, initially?" "For you to perform at the Wandering Star, to help establish it as more than just another dining establishment." He hesitated. "But after knowing you, after hearing you sing night after night, my expectations changed." "How so?" "I began to hope that you might see me as more than your employer. That you might, in time, come to care for me as I've come to care for you." His voice dropped lower. "Though I realize now that my deception likely destroyed any chance of that." Lenora rose, moving to the window that overlooked the valley. "When I was a girl, my mother used to say that a person's true character is revealed not in their mistakes, but in how they address them." "Wise words," Jackson murmured. She turned to face him. "You were wrong to buy my contract without my knowledge, to let me believe I had been fired rather than sold. You were wrong to keep this from me for so long." "I know." His expression was pained, but, she continued, "You've treated me with respect since I arrived in redemption. You've given me freedom, opportunity, and safety. You've become—" She hesitated, "important to me." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What are you saying, Lenora?" "I'm saying that I'm choosing to stay in redemption on my terms." She straightened her shoulders. "I want a formal contract as the Wandering Star's performer, with fair wages that will allow me to repay the $500 you spent." "There's no need for repayment. There is to me," she interrupted firmly. "I won't move forward with this burden between us." Jackson considered her words, then nodded slowly. "Very well, I'll have the contract drawn up tomorrow, and as for repayment, if that's what you truly want, I won't argue." "There's one more condition," Lenora added, her heart pounding. "I want us to begin again as equals. No secrets, no transactions between us, just two people getting to know one another properly." A slow smile spread across Jackson's face. "I'd like that very much." In the days that followed, they did exactly that. Jackson began courting Lenora openly, with proper respect for her reputation. He escorted her to church on Sundays, took her on rides through the countryside, and sat in the front row during her performances, his pride evident to all. Lenora, for her part, kept her word about repayment. Each month she set aside a portion of her earnings, gradually reducing the debt she felt she owed. Though Jackson insisted it was unnecessary, she remained firm. As autumn turned the surrounding hills to gold and crimson, the relationship between them deepened. They discovered shared interests in literature and history, and complementary differences that sparked lively debates. Jackson revealed more about his experiences during the war, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him, and his dreams for the future of redemption. Lenora shared stories of her childhood, her mother's influence on her love of music, and her own hopes for what lay ahead. One crisp October evening, as they walked back to the Wandering Star after a town meeting, Jackson broached a subject they had danced around for weeks. I received word today that the Fletcher gang was captured near El Paso, he said. Apparently they robbed the wrong stagecoach one carrying a federal judge. That's wonderful news, Lenora replied. Redemption will be safer without their threats. It made me think about protection, Jackson continued, his voice thoughtful, about keeping safe what matters most. Lenora glanced at him curiously. What are you saying? He stopped walking, turning to face her under the light of a street lamp. I'm saying that I love you, Lenora Sinclair. I think I have since I first heard you sing in that dusty saloon. These past months, getting to know you truly, have only deepened those feelings. Her heart soared at his words, though she tried to maintain her composure. Jackson, please let me finish. He took her hands in his. I know we began in an unusual way, with circumstances neither of us would have chosen, but I believe that was fate's doing, bringing us together despite our separate paths. I believe that too, she admitted softly. Encouraged, he continued. I don't want to be just the man who owns the establishment where you perform. I want to be your partner, your protector when you need one, and your strongest supporter when you don't. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Lenora Sinclair, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Inside the box nestled a ring with a single perfect diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires. It caught the lamplight, sparkling like captured stars. Before you answer, Jackson said quickly, you should know that I've already filed papers dissolving any remaining financial obligation between us. You owe me nothing. Tears filled Lenora's eyes. You did that without telling me. I wanted there to be absolutely no question that I'm asking out of love alone. No transactions, no obligations, just my heart, freely given to you. In that moment, all the doubts and hesitations that had lingered in Lenora's mind melted away. This man who had made mistakes but learned from them, who had respected her wishes even when they differed from his own, who looked at her with such honest adoration, this was a man she could trust with her future. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I'll marry you, Jackson Stone. His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness to come. They were married on a bright November morning in the Redemption Church, with the entire town in attendance. Lenora wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha had helped her select from a catalog, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Jackson, resplendent in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with poorly concealed impatience that drew chuckles from the congregation. When Lenora sang during the ceremony, a hymn of thanksgiving that showcased the full beauty of her voice, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Jackson watched her with such naked adoration that even the most cynical townsfolk found themselves believing in the power of love. The celebration afterward at the Wandering Star lasted well into the evening, with food, dancing, and of course, more singing. As the newly married couple prepared to depart for the Circle S, which would now be their shared home, Reverend Thomas offered a final blessing. May the love that brought you together grow stronger with each passing day, and may the music that flows from your hearts never cease. Life at the Circle S settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Jackson continued to manage the ranch, while Lenora divided her time between their home and the Wandering Star, where she still performed 3 nights a week. Together, they began expanding the restaurant to include a proper stage and seating for larger audiences. Winter brought heavy snows that temporarily isolated the ranch, giving the newlyweds precious time alone to deepen their bond. Evenings were spent by the fire, with Lenora sometimes singing while Jackson accompanied her on his mother's piano, which he had finally learned to play with Lenora's patient teaching. When spring arrived, bringing wildflowers and new calves to the Circle S, it also brought news that filled their home with even greater joy. Lenora was expecting their first child, a Christmas baby, the doctor confirmed after examining her. Both mother and child appear to be in excellent health. Jackson was overcome, alternating between jubilation and concern for Lenora's well-being. He insisted on reducing her performances at the Wandering Star, though she assured him she could continue through the summer at least. Our child will be born knowing his mother's beautiful voice, he declared, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "But I won't risk your health for anything." As Lenora's pregnancy progressed, a new idea began to take shape between them. The railroad had indeed come to redemption, bringing growth and prosperity to the town. The Wandering Star was thriving, and the ranch's cattle business was more profitable than ever. "I've been thinking," Lenora said one evening as they sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the distant hills. "About the future, about our child, about redemption. What thoughts are occupying that brilliant mind of yours?" Jackson asked, his hand finding hers. "We should build a proper performance hall, not just an expanded restaurant, but a true venue for music and theater. Something that could bring culture to redemption, give it another reason to flourish beyond the railroad and cattle." Jackson considered her words thoughtfully. "It would be a significant investment, but imagine what it could mean for the town, for the children growing up here, including our own." Her eyes shone with passion. "They wouldn't have to leave for the cities to experience art and music. We could bring performers from San Antonio, even as far as New Orleans or Chicago." "The Lenora Sinclair Performance Hall," Jackson mused, warming to the idea. "It has a fine ring to it." "The Redemption Hall," she corrected gently. "This wouldn't be just for me, it would be for everyone." By the time their son, James William Stone, arrived on a snowy December night in 1876, plans for the Redemption Hall were well underway. Construction would begin in the spring, using the finest materials and craftsmen that could be found. Parenthood brought new dimensions to their love as they watched their son grow and develop his own personality. To no one's surprise, little James showed an early affinity for music, quieting instantly whenever Lenora sang to him. "He has your ear," Jackson observed proudly as their son, not yet a year old, moved rhythmically to a tune Lenora hummed while preparing dinner. "And your determination," she replied, noting how the child refused to stop pulling himself up on furniture despite numerous tumbles. The Redemption Hall opened on Independence Day, 1878, with Lenora as its first featured performer. Though motherhood and managing the hall kept her too busy for regular performances at the Wandering Star, she continued to sing at special events and on Sundays at church. As the years passed, the Stone family grew with the addition of twin daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, born in the spring of 1880. The Circle S expanded as well, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the county under Jackson's careful management. Redemption itself flourished, growing from a small town into a respectable city with a reputation for culture and refinement unusual for a Western community. The Performance Hall became known throughout Texas as a premier venue, hosting traveling orchestras, theater troupes, and renowned singers. On a warm summer evening in 1885, as they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson and Lenora stood on the veranda of their home, watching their children play in the twilight. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" Jackson asked, his arm around her waist. "When you were sweeping floors at the Rusty Nail," Lenora leaned into his embrace, contemplating the question. "Never. I hoped for freedom to sing without fear, but I never dared dream of all this: a loving husband, beautiful children, a community that values music as I do." "You created this reality, Lenora. Your voice, your spirit, your determination, they changed everything. They certainly changed me." She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had come to know as well as her own, the lines at his eyes deeper now, silver threading through his dark hair, but his gaze still holding the same warmth that had first drawn her to him. "We created it together," she corrected. "From the moment you asked me to sing for you that day in the saloon," Jackson smiled, remembering, "best decision I ever made. Even though I was sold for singing too loud," she teased, referencing what had become a private joke between them. "Especially because of that," he replied, pulling her closer. "I may have paid for a songbird, but I found my heart's match instead." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lenora sang softly for her husband alone, a love song that spoke of journeys and homecomings, of challenges overcome and joy discovered. Her voice, still as pure and powerful as when he first heard it, carried across the land they both loved, a testament to the unexpected path that had led them to each other and the life they had built together. In the distance, lights glowed from the windows of Redemption, the town that had given them both a second chance. And closer at hand, their children's laughter mingled with Lenora's song, creating a harmony more beautiful than either of them could have imagined on that fateful day when a dusty saloon girl dared to sing and a lonely rancher stopped to listen.